is that the administration did reach out to the Electric Sector Coordinating Council, the CEO-led group, right, in the electric sector, agreed on an action plan. I think it was 11 to 13 items. I don't know exactly, but it was more than the 4 that you saw. And there was action items for the government, and there was action items for the industry.
This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. Joining me on this episode is Rob Lee. Rob is the CEO and founder of Dragos, which is one of the leading companies in the detection, response, threat intelligence area. In fact, Rob, you might have the leading company after that $110 million C round raise in December, but definitely one of the leaders there. And also, I'd have to say that when it comes to, let's say, I don't want to use the term thought leader, although you are one, but in terms of putting out positions with the media and such, Rob is really one of the go-to people, not only in the OT area, but also in the wider media. And I say that as a compliment because it's really means you're saying something interesting and you have good communication skills. So it's
Thanks.
A pleasure to have you on the show, Rob.
It's always a thrill to be here. I've always been a fan of years and S4 and all this, so it's always good to be able to sync up.
And we talk a lot, sometimes socially, sometimes on DMs and emails, but we've been waiting for a good, juicy topic to bring up on the show. So I think we have one. So what we're going to talk about is, for the listeners here, we're going to first talk a little bit about the Biden administration's efforts, and Rob's a lot closer to that than I am, so I want to get his thoughts. Then we'll talk maybe about an area where we spar a little bit in terms of prioritization in the ICS world of what you should be doing. And then we're going to finish a little bit about maybe the prospects for an ICS Security Pro over the next years post-COVID. But with that as an introduction, Rob, maybe we should start. The Biden administration has put out a lot of things. I'm looking at your quote here. You've said they're very encouraging. You've praised the team quite a bit. A lot of positive words about what they've been doing. I was curious, maybe as a positive starting point, if there was some specific government effort that you had high hopes for and what you think it possibly could achieve.
Yeah, and so I do think there's a lot of competence around the table in this administration. When you look at the people that they've picked, not only for the National Security Council, but it's like Jenny Lee and SZA and Nuremberg in the White House. I mean, you've got some really, really good people. So right off the bat, that speaks well. But at a high level, what they're doing that I like the most is they're actually reaching out to partner with industry. And we've seen this fail before, where some government organizations will say, I know the problem, I know the threat, I'm going to tell you how I want you to solve it. And it's very prescriptive, and that almost always fails. What this group of people is doing is reaching out to the CEOs, the CISOs. They're saying, hey, what are y'all's problems? What would you like to accomplish? How can we do that together? And that's really good. For a specific thing, I do like that they're focused on OT visibility and detection and response. Obviously, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I like it maybe for a different reason than people would expect. I think we're going to find things in our customer environments. We go in, we regularly find things. There's a lot more happening than people realize. But there's also a hype cycle that forms in government where you see in NSA collection or whatever else, these various threats, you never get the closure that no, they actually didn't break in, or no, it really didn't manifest like you thought it did. But the government doesn't get that closure. And so they're always just looking at the next threat and they're freaking out. And to just be able to have visibility and detection to say, hey, instead of going to the Washington Post and saying the 100 utilities are hacked, why don't you just check? You're like, oh, no, it's 3. Great, let's focus on the 3, but let's stop scaring the American public. Like, I'm super excited about that kind of initiative just to get to ground truth reality.
There certainly is a big focus on visibility and detection, and we'll talk about that, as you said, maybe our disagreements on that. But if we focus more on the focus, the Department of Energy 100-day sprint had 4 bullets. 3 of them were around that. Mm-hmm. The executive order was not only saying the federal government needed to do that through endpoint detection and other things, as well as encouraging private industry to do it, and a little bit about information sharing. But I didn't see a lot of specifics as to how those big goals were actually going to be resulting in something that the government would be doing beyond just saying they should be done. Are you expecting anything in terms of actual actions?
It's actually happening right now. And I think that's the misconception is DOE put out, here's 4 areas we're going to focus on.
Right.
Privately, what happened is folks from the administration, and I only know this secondhand, like I'm not involved in any of this, but our customers speak to us and share, hey, here's what's going on. And so what's been shared with us is that the administration did reach out to the Electric Sector Coordinating Council, the CEO-led group, right, in the electric sector, agreed on an action plan. I think it was 11 to 13 items. I don't know exactly, but it was more than the 4 that you saw. And there was action items for the government and there was action items for the industry. And that's what they collaborated on. That's what they agreed on. And one of the kind of themes for the government action items was go get on the same page. Because right now, if you're a CEO of an electric company, you'll get DHS reaching out to you, DOE, National Guard, the base commander, NSA, DOD, like everybody thinks that they can tell you how to run your business and they're trying to be helpful. And I think there was a push by the electric sector leaders to say, we love you. We want to partner with you, but please go have one consistent message. Like, what do you actually want us to do? Right. And on the industry side, they said, we want you to go pick and deploy technologies against this visibility challenge. So without speaking at a turn and without trying to get into the industry's business here, we know because we've had 40, 50 plus utilities reach out in a very short amount of time and say, we want to deploy and we want to take advantage of the neighborhood keeper program that we have, which is around being able to share the insights to government without sharing your data or your identity. So those things are happening today and there's massive movement taking place. They're just not putting it in the press and they're not putting it out to people that aren't involved in the effort.
Well, I don't think they need to. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Of course, being an analyst, I'd like to see it to be able to analyze it, but I can understand why it might be more effective if you don't put it out. Hopefully they'll put out more than just what they have put out to date. But again, this is iterative. I guess one of the questions I had, though, was you mentioned all these different government organizations. So as a follow-up there, I think if I remember your take on this, you're not a real fan of CISA taking over everything or CISA taking over everything. Have they agreed as to who, if there's going to be one point of contact, have they agreed who that point of contact is going to be?
I think if you ask them, as I have together, they'll talk about collaboration. And then you get them in a room with an asset owner one-on-one, and there's no collaboration. So my very candid, maybe scathing, unintentionally scathing review is they haven't figured it out. They're working on that now. I'm very excited. I'm generally a big DOE fan. I'm excited about the leadership they have over there. I'm really excited about Jen Easterly and some of the folks coming into CSA. So like, I do think that they will figure it out. But I do disagree with government coming in to save the day. And it's not because I have like some moral or ethical concern with it. Government can't scale to this problem. And they can't provide all the things that need to be done in this space. They just can't. When they say, oh, we can do incident response, not really, not in comparison to the pros that are doing it day in and day out. If we go in or FireEye goes in or whoever, it's a different level. And so I love them. I want them to be successful, but I want them to focus on the mission that they have, which is the federal government. Federal government security is not in a good place. CISA needs more funding. They need more authorities. They need to be able to go into a government network and say, you will make these changes, not here's our advice. So when Congress asked me this question, my response is, I like all the people around the table, but CISA needs more resources and authorities to fix federal government mission space. They need to stay out of private sector mission space, and they need to spend more time doing amplification and coordination and front door government, not here's our flyaway team or let's deploy something to try to monitor for you. Like that's never going to scale to the problem.
It's funny, I had a quote that you wrote just as my next question, so you kind of guessed where I was going next. So you have this issue, and I think it's fair. And in fact, I would say you not only have the federal government problem, but you also have the issue of state and local governments. So if they wanted to spread their arms bigger and say we have federal, they could certainly be of great assistance to other governments. But are they taking this advice? Are you expecting that we will be seeing government trying to deploy systems onto utilities or onto well, I guess natural gas organizations are utilities as well, pipelines and such, or will they step back and say, we'll provide guidance and you should do it?
Yeah, they're actually already deployed into a bunch of different environments, and there's tech stacks and similar, and there's flyaway teams, and you'll see people tweet out there like, "We did 300 remote assessments this year on asset owners," and it's like, with how many people? And they're like, three. Like, you're not really doing an assessment; you're doing a default, scan off of some default tool, and you're giving a false sense of security to the asset owner. So they're already doing all these things. They're looking for funding. Government is looking for funding additionally from government to go expand those. And my pushback on that is, again, wonderful people doing it for all the right reasons, right? Like, they just want to be helpful. However, it always goes to, like, let's go to Fortune 500 companies. Like, we don't need to go to a Fortune 500 company with tax paid resources and try to provide them free security services. One, they're not up to snuff with what you can get in the market anyways. And number two, those companies should actually be investing in that challenge. If you want to go help anybody, go help out the water co-op or somebody in a cooperative or muni, help those folks, but they're not the ones that get focused on anyways because of intelligence reasons. And I think it's a little bit backwards. And quite honestly, I don't think the government appreciates that very few CEOs sitting in that room with, let's say, CrowdStrike on the IT side or DHS. Most of them will choose DHS, not because they think that DHS is better than CrowdStrike, but because if they're in front of Congress and they're attacked and they say, "Oh, we had the federal government in here," and they look through our networks, it's a much more defensible situation. So it's not even a fair conversation that's taking place right now.
It's funny. I had almost that same discussion with Marty Edwards on stage when he was running the ICS portion of DHS back in, I think, S416. And even if you think you want to do it, just the scale you'd have to achieve in terms of hiring people and systems and reporting, it's just huge. Yeah. And it really, those counting stats to me never made much sense in terms of saying how they're doing. The only reason that would make sense for me for them to do it a little bit is just to get a little real world information.
For sure.
If they told me we want to have some minimal capability to go out there periodically across various sectors so we can educate ourselves and have a more real world view of what's going on, I could support that. But if they're, like you say, if they're planning on actually scaling up and doing this instead of private industry, I think it's a failure. And if they do it, I'm really hoping we see some metrics that are more than just counting stats.
Yeah.
Because I think those counting stats are not worth much.
I think their intent is, there as if the government's one giant thing. But generally the intent I hear is go to Congress, ask for more funding to scale these things out to try to go take care of it. Because when you're in front of Congress and you're the government and you're answering to Congress, why aren't you doing X? Well, we need more resources to go do it. It's hard to say we probably shouldn't be doing this. And let's go focus elsewhere. That's a very difficult conversation. And again, wonderful people, they've got smarts. But too often government will say, here's what I want, and here's how I think you should do it. And what works is, here's what I want, experts in the field, how do you think we should do this? And so if they wanted real world information, if they wanted insights, if they wanted experience, they could just go to the asset owners. Here's what we need. How can we do this together? Oh, we can collaborate on exercises. We can go do things together. We can do a water exercise like we do GridX because that's awesome. And the information sharing too often has been, here, deploy this government sensor to do information sharing, when you could just say, here's the requirements. And that's what happened in the action plan. They just said, we're not telling you what to pick, but here's the requirements. What do you want to go do? Dragos was identified as the best for this effort, not the best vendor ever, but just the best for this effort by the utilities. And so they're seeing it, and government's going to get information sharing, and that's how it can work and scale.
But it sounds like, just to kind of close this one up, it sounds like your expectation is that there will be requests for more funds, and they might pursue this expanded government, let's say, competing organization to do assessments and monitoring and response and things like that.
It will happen. And I think, again, not trying to speak out of turn here, but to be extraordinarily candid, all the conversations I've had with Senate and Congress, and like I talk to them way too much, but they're just wonderful people trying to move the needle as well. Sure. All of the conversations are, if NERC SIP is so wonderful for the electric sector, why isn't it everywhere? Why is it not on distribution? Why is it not on gas pipe? But that's the answer to everything. Why not? And so the electric sector was really smart at a really well-positioned time to say, what do you want, government? Let's go voluntarily do this. And we'll pay for it ourselves, and we'll do this. And whether or not it was their intention, I think they sidestepped some really bad regulation and really poorly informed things that were coming. But that's not happening in gas, water, chemical, these other sectors yet. And if those sectors don't step up and take the same kind of community response and we'll go get something done, I think there will be a lot of ammunition for government to say, we need to take care of it ourselves. And we'll either see regulations or we'll see a lot more funding to these government programs, or both. And so not trying to scare people, but Congress is well educated on this topic and time is up.
Yeah. And certainly the pipeline incident expanded the view beyond electric sector. It said,
for sure. In Oldsmar, I think people in the technical community said, oh, okay, Oldsmar wasn't that big a deal. And you look at the pipeline, you're like, it's not even OT. That's technical. Remove the technical. You had a foreign actor try to kill people on American soil, and you had East Coast gas go down, to a point that people were filling gasoline in bags. Yeah. Congress is going to act.
Yep. Okay, let's hit another part. Information sharing. This is something we've been hearing about for decades, literally since I think even 1999. I was involved in InfraGard. We always hear government, public-private partnership, information sharing and such. And of course, both the Department of Energy, one of the 4 bullets was on information sharing. The executive order included something on information sharing. So the question, I guess, is, do you see anything different in these efforts that would lead you to believe it'll be more successful?
I do. And so this goes back to that neighborhood keeper conversation about why we were identified in the effort anyways. But let's maybe take a step back.
Okay.
When we look at information sharing, sometimes we confuse data sharing, information sharing, and intelligence sharing. A lot of the government programs that you're talking about, and some of the ones that have persisted to today, is data sharing. Even the CRISP program across the electric utilities, where they share external network traffic, it's data sharing. It's, here's all this data off of my site, go look through it. And I'm not condemning that at all, but there are pros and cons to that. Pros is you don't have to know what you're looking for. You've got the data. You can go spelunk around in it. The cons is there's a physics challenge at a point. There's latency because now an analyst has got to go through it all. You're sacrificing your identity so you're not anonymous in the data set. And there's real data security challenges. What happens if that central provider gets compromised or so forth? And with those cons, what that generally translates into is it's slower. And when it gets back to you, it's maybe missing some of the context of the internal environment anyways. And analysts drown in the data. I remember being in NSA post 9/11, a couple years following that, where our mission set was to find new ICS threats. And we went and we actively got rid of certain collection because it was so much collection, because post 9/11, everyone was like, oh my God, I missed something. I got to have all the data. Let me collect everything. And what happened is analysts just drowned in the data. And by scoping it down to more specific sets of, I want you to find these types of things in these data sets, analysts started finding things. And so you can drown in the data. So a lot of the failures, in my opinion, of what you're talking about is we didn't know what we were looking for. We thought if we just had all this magical data, we'd magically find it, and analysts drown in it, and it takes time. So what we did, and I talked about this on your show 3 years ago now, I said, hey, we're going to do this neighborhood keeper thing. And the idea behind neighborhood keeper was, let's just flip the model. Instead of you give up all your sensitive and secretive data, which also has NERC SIP, BES considerations and similar in certain sectors, why don't you just keep all your data? I don't need to know your identity, but let me search at the point of the data. So instead of centralized data and ask questions, decentralized data and federate out the questions. And so it's this idea of, if I know there's a new state actor or a new vulnerability or whatever, and I'm the EISAC or government or Dragos or whoever, why can't I just throw that detection out and say, oh, 3 utilities have it or 4 gas providers have it. Hey, participant 3, whoever you are, here's additional context for you that you need. And you've already got the data and everything. You're empowered to go fix it. So it's just kind of flipping it a little bit. We have been successful in that program. It's worked very well. And now it's getting rolled out way faster and way wider. And I think that is a good example of of data sharing where you're not actually sharing the data, but you get all the insights. Separately, and I'll take a breath after this because I'm sure you want to ask something, but separately, information sharing, which is more towards InfraGard and ISACs and similar, works not because of the data, not because there's any magical intel, and pitching it that way is always going to frustrate people. It works because you're getting points of contact at different organizations together to have conversations. And that is really useful, but it shouldn't be pitched as data and intelligence sharing, which is sometimes how it gets pitched. And so people feel this is valuable, but it's not what I was told. And that's where you can get things incorrect.
You talk about the approach that you think would work, and you described a neighborhood keeper. And it was good to see that program succeed. I mean, like you said, you came on 3 years or so ago to talk about it, and it actually rolled out, and people are using it, and I'm hearing good things about it. Is the government looking at that type of approach when in these, as you said, there's a lot going on beyond these little bullets we see? Is the government looking at expanding that type of approach?
Yeah. Candidly, like my understanding today is multiple government agencies are talking to us about how could we leverage how do we leverage what you've already built?
Yep.
So I can't make any commitments on behalf of them, but they're having those conversations about how could agency X also start disseminating intelligence and sharing and kind of using that functionality as well, which is a good thing. I don't see, though, candidly, though, I don't see any of them trying to go that direction. And here's why. To tell a government analyst that you can't have the identity of the victim and you can't have their data, it makes them like, again, I'm not trying to paint everybody, but these are the conversations I've had. They get kind of ticked off. Like, what do you mean?
Well, and a lot of that flows downhill, right? Because
yes.
You tell someone and they know their boss is going to ask them that question. And,
yes.
And then they're going to have to say, well, we set up the program so we'd never know. And that's not going to be good for at least for their day, if not their career.
It is, there's a desire to know everything.
Yeah.
And you don't need to know everything to solve the problem, but you'll never get rid of that desire to do everything. I was literally having a discussion with senior folks in the government where I said, look at this thing. Utility industry is already adopting it. You could take advantage of it. It really solves your challenge. When you charge you a penny, solved. And they kept coming back to, but how do I know who they are? And I'm like, you don't. Well, can they tell me? I'm like, yeah, they can disclose themselves to you if they want, but I can't force it. I'm like, no. Well, how do we go in and offer them our services and advice if, well, then if they don't choose to let you in, you can't go in. And it just, you could see it turning and twisting of, well, how do I go knock on their door if they, and I don't think you'll convince big government to ever be in a position where they don't want to know all the things that have any sort of ... national security. The moment that national security word comes up, they want to know who it is. They want to make sure they made the right choices, et cetera. But my counter to that is you'll also get people not to participate. If the only option is you have to just share your data and identity, you'll get 5% of the community actually take it seriously. You can do that. And if you get 5% of the community, that's fine. But for the other 95% that don't want to share their data and identity, but are okay with you having the insights, okay with this collective defense idea of sharing threats and similar, why not have that as an option too? And that is what's working.
But if I hear you, just in real politic here, it sounds like things like CRISP and other things that would get data feeds, not intel feeds or analysis feeds, but actually data feeds is their goal and probably the direction they're going to be at least pushing industry to do, if not forcing them to do. They'd probably need a law to force them to do it, but at least pushing them to do it.
So I think CRISP is a little bit different because it is an industry program, but that model is absolutely the model that's being floated consistently of, well, we want that. However, and this is the interesting piece, that is there's a couple agencies that have that position. That's not Congress's position. Like I've had these discussions with Senate Energy Committee, House Homeland Committee, et cetera. Their position is we have a duty to inform. If the United States government knows utility X is compromised, tell them. What they do with it or who they are is irrespective of that. So can we solve that? I'm like, yep, we can solve that. So right now, government is disjointed where I think you'll see certain agencies push for data and access, but the Senate and congressional positions that I'm hearing and seeing has nothing to do with that.
Oh, that makes sense, and that'll be worth watching. I have a lot of sympathy for Congress because I always imagine myself sitting there if I had that role, and I'm supposed to understand ICS, OT security, and I'm supposed to understand the
Farmers and
pandemic and
yeah,
farm aid and a million other things and be smart on them. And it almost seems to me to be an impossible job, which leads more to relying on the executive branch. But it's a difficult balance. We'll have to see how that comes out. Did you have any last thoughts you wanted to say on the government efforts before we move on to our next topic?
again, I know I typically sound harsh, so I just want to say lots of good folks. They're all well and malicious. I think it's just a difference of opinions, and yeah, we'll see how it shakes out.
And I guess we're both probably not, I was going to say optimistic, but actually happy is a better word, that they are getting these talented people. They are focusing on the issue, even if
for sure.
specifically what they're doing, just this step up in awareness and funding and effort is a huge plus.
Absolutely. I see the folks come through my SANS class and they're really passionate, really sharp. There's a lot more of them these days. Like, yeah, there's going to be some goodness. I just want it to be efficient. Like, I'm not sitting from the sidelines going, that's not going to work. I just, as a taxpayer, I want it to be efficient and I want it to be quick because we've got real issues.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get to the fun part where we butt heads a little bit.
Yeah.
And I guess I just want to, sometimes people see us go back and forth on social media, and we actually
I've
are
stopped
friends.
tweeting at you. I've stopped
Yes.
tweeting at you because people will be like, yeah, can you believe Dale said that? And I'll be like, I like Dale. Like, what are you talking about?
It was kind of like when I had that debate with Eric Byers after calling him a SCADA apologist. And it's like, oh, you guys are actually friends and go out to dinner after this? But I would say where we differ most, and I think this is, and feel free to disagree with this, but I don't think it's so much that we disagree on what should be done. I think to me, it's an ordering question. And you talked about efficiency, a value or an efficiency question. Like, is this where we should be spending our money today? Is this where we should be spending our money now? And we probably, just to kind of set it up from my point of view, I think our main disagreement is on the timing and value of detection and threat intel. And I'm a huge fan of this. I believe it's got great possibilities today. It's getting better every day. The improvement I've seen in products from yours and your competitors over the last 4 or 5 years, absolutely amazing. I think it belongs in the program. I guess where I have a little bit of a problem is, and in preparation, I just kind of created a list here. I'd say, well, you really shouldn't be looking at that until you have a strong perimeter, not just a firewall, but actually looked at what's allowed through it, two-factor remote access. You're patching your externally accessible attack surface. You've got application whitelisting on your computers. You can do backup and recovery. You have looked at your high consequence reduction through all the possible methods that you could do that. You've got an incident response plan and a playbook to do something with this detection and threat intel once you see it. And maybe the last one that might get ignored is you've done the basic detection. Are you actually looking at your endpoint detection product logs? Are you looking at your firewall egress? Are you looking for new admins? Or, you don't have to go to the Mercedes-Benz if you don't have a bicycle yet. That's kind of my view. So as that is a position, I guess where do we disagree here? Do you think that products like yours belong before that, or where are we differing here?
Yeah, I think it's super subtle in our differences. And be clear, when I usually message you, late at night on LinkedIn or whatever, and you're kind enough to respond, the biggest things I disagree with is how it's discussed. Not even like I don't think we actually have that many disagreements in terms of like what should you do if we were in front of an asset owner. But like as an example with the blog that you just had on detection, it was detection response won the market because look at all this marketing and sales that Dragos is spending. And, you could really risk your career by not doing this. And this is board pressure and whatever. And if we had a conversation, I'd be like, but don't you see there's also a lot of people having value? And you're like, oh yeah. And don't you see there's also a lot of wins where people are finding things? Oh yeah. But because that's missing, I hear back from people that read your blog. Well, Dale says, and probably the same way that you hear what Rob says, well, Dale says that it's just winning because of marketing and sales. I'm like, that's not really what Dale's saying. And so that's probably where we mostly disagree. But let's go to your question. I would absolutely put prevention before detection. For sure. You should absolutely multi-factor authentication. If you don't have multi-factor authentication rolled out where you can, you can't do it everywhere, but where you can, man, that's a gap. If you don't have a firewall separating you from the internet, please go do that before you deploy Dragos platform. Like that's kind of important. So like all those things are correct. I don't know that I would go into like application whitelisting and a bunch of other stuff yet. I definitely think the perimeter, kind of the architecture, if I was running the program, the first thing I would do is build a defensible architecture. All right. And whatever we wanted to define that defensible is, that's the very first step from a security perspective. Probably the next thing is the incident response plan, because when we start looking, we're going to find something and I want to know how to handle it and so forth. I think the nuance here is the industry tends to do nothing but prevention and think it's okay. Or, hey, I'm going to go put 90 cents out of my dollar into all these prevention efforts. And 2 to 3 years from now, I'll get into detection. Or what's worse is you find the 6 controls you want to have and you look across your organization, you spend 1 year doing this one. And then in year 2, you want to get to this one. And like these big roadmaps from the big 4 consultings that we always see, and they never get to the end. And that's disconnected from the board. When the board talks to security staff, what they're looking at is, dude, if you know what right looks like look at our critical sites. We've probably got 20 to 30% of our sites that are truly critical to the business. If that's the right security package, go roll that package out at those 30% of the sites. Then we can do the other stuff later. But don't tell me in year 4, when we get chief intellectual property is stolen by another company or country, that you just didn't get to it yet. Like what are you doing? And separately, I'm a big fan of the visibility portion of the detection, where we were responding to so many cases, Dale. And this is where I get a little bit frosty when I see people tweeting and whatever, there's no OT attacks, whatever. I'm like, dude, just because nobody invited you to the prom doesn't mean the dance isn't happening. Okay. Like we're getting called in all the time. We had 3 cases just in 1 week. You know, it's not like this is, we're responding to a lot of OT ransomware as an example today. And in every single one of those heartbreaking stories, when these companies are going through the worst day they've ever had, and you're looking at them and going, what happened? Well, we followed all the guidance. Look at our compliance. Look at our standards. We did all these things in prevention and whatever else. But what they missed is they didn't know their environments. They didn't apply the prevention across the board. You know, they didn't actually put in all the locations they needed to, or that prevention atrophied over the year. And since the last assessment, the any rule popped in the firewall, or there was another vendor connection that came in that didn't have the multi-factor on. And so they're doing the right motion, but because there's nothing to back it up and reinforce it, or having that visibility of watch your prevention investments, it's misapplied or atrophying, and people are getting compromised. I won't say hurt, but like it's hurting these businesses. And so I would generally say, I want you to go look at prevention, but I want you to understand we as a community have a prevention bias. If you look at IEC 62443 as an example, 75% to 100% of each of those standards is preventative. NERC SIP, 70%. You look at certain NIST 853, 95%. It's only that 5 or 10% that get left to be divided against detection, response, and recovery. And we as a community need to realize we have a bias. These are good things to do. We got to get to the other things, because we're not winning with just one control.
Well, boy, a lot to go there. That was great. And I got the 75% from Little Bobby this weekend, so I picked up on that. I like how sometimes when you can't say something, Little Bobby says it. So
yeah,
this is great.
It's my therapy.
But no, it's very effective. I wish I had thought of it years ago. It's been a great comic, and I think it's been actually very useful to the community to get a short message out there. A couple things. One is, for me, I'm agreeing with you on prevention. I think, though, when you go from prevention, then you next jump to recovery, in my mind. Mm-hmm. And then I would jump to response. And then when I have a response, then I'm ready to detect.
Yes.
So I guess I don't jump from prevention to detection. I say, I agree, those prevention gets almost all the attention, and you see like 3 requirements for recovery. Yeah. And it may be because it's so simple, hey, you need to be able to recover, but still in terms of resources, it's greatly underused, as all those are.
And in the standards, they're really prescriptive of you should go do these 3 things with prevention. And then detection, they're like, you should monitor. And it's super vague and people don't get it right. But
Yeah.
but I don't disagree with what you just said. It's how much are you doing in each of those buckets that we're jumping, where people will go roll out firewalls, MFA, application whitelist, and they'll do like 10 different preventative items. And because they don't have visibility, they're not getting the value out of it that they expected.
Oh, I think we're definitely in agreement there. For example, I would put a detection system in before I was doing quarterly patching of all my cyber assets inside the OT environment, because of risk reduction. And just to let the viewers and listeners know, Rob had a great quote that I don't know if you're just being kind or you forgot it, but he called me a detection apologist earlier on before we started recording. And there is a certain element to that. It's because what I'm saying is you should do these things first, but you could take the argument of saying, look, you got to be doing all those things and this. None of this wait 3 years until you're ready for detection. And I must admit that's a compelling argument if you're willing to spend the resources to do all that. That's a tougher argument I have.
But here's the thing that I think trips up most of the community. And I don't want to say this in a way that's too coarse, but we all kind of fight about the rice bowl sometimes and the side, like, let's divide up the rice bowl. And there's a lot of board level conversation to be had of the rice bowl is too small, y'all. Like, we are barely getting by with this enterprise security work. You want to throw a whole larger mission set of OT at us, which is appropriate because it's where the business generates revenue. The IT is the add-on, not the ICS. And you need to resource us for this. And these companies, especially like Fortune 2000s or anybody that's actually national critical infrastructure, like, look at the public commentary. When people realize, the kind of investments that are going into this, it calls for regulation and everything else. And so I think it's in the interest of the community to tell a more accurate story at the executive level of what the risk is and what it really takes to reduce it. And then we can talk about how to divide up what we get. But most teams I see are either under-resourced, or sometimes I see it the exact opposite. And it's very rare, and I don't want to blast anybody, but I'll see like a CSO from the financial sector that comes into a utility or so forth, and some of them are good. And they'll go, I'm not focusing on ICS. What about our enterprise? And it's like, you're in business because of the ICS side. Like, you need to go take a look at it, especially if your board's concerned. Like, we need to spend more time showing folks that doing 5% of the mission is not excusable, regardless of how you decide to go divide up things after.
Yeah. No, that's completely fair. That's probably a whole nother show. We are suffering right now from the issue of decades of OT or operations basically saying, we got this, stay away, not informing executive management of the risks, not getting good at asking for budget.
Yep.
Because I'm sure you've seen it as well, where they are effective at this, resources aren't the problem. It's speed and talent and things of that nature. It's not money. Once the executives understand the risk, it's like, I want this solved in 3 to 6 months. How much do I need to spend?
I literally have these conversations with some great CEOs out there, and it's so different. It's so different. Like, the CEO will be like, oh, you mean I can't go through my digital transformation project that's going to get us like $100 million net profit each plant, like, because this isn't prepared? You're a rounding error. Go fix it. It's like, oh gosh.
Yeah, exactly. There was one other thing I wanted to hit. Well, actually, two, maybe just briefly on the article that you mentioned. And I don't think you disagree on this, but I'm curious if you do. My point in that article was, up until I wrote that article, I would often go into, whether they were boards or executives or operations, whoever I was working with, and I would create this ordering argument for them. And I would say, do this, then this, and this. And then when you're there, you're ready for this great detection offering. And what I said in that article is, I think with the government coming out with what they did, it now is something that there's not yet regulation, but there might be soon, but there's reputational risk if you don't have something like this in place when they're both saying this is what is highest priority you must do. I think even beyond security, there is now a risk to the organization if you don't do that. So that was my kind of capitulation, saying we can't look at this ordering anymore. You have to do this. You have no choice.
Yeah. And
Do you think it's that far yet where it's going to be a must do just because of reputational risk?
I don't think so, but I still agree with your intent there with the article. What I think is happening though is the government's going, and others, boards even, are getting so smart on this. We're going, you told me all that other stuff was already done. Why can't you get to detection and response? And what's catching up is they're going, well, actually, we didn't really roll it out yet, or we didn't really make those investments. And they're sitting around going, well, if you've been this incompetent, we need to regulate you. And like, that's some of the conversation that's happening. So I don't disagree with what you're writing of do those other things first. What I'm disagreeing with is if you're in critical infrastructure and you didn't listen the last 20 years, time's literally up and you need to go move. And every day that you can't get to detection and response is reputational harm.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And that ties into the detection apologist sort of discussion that you said. No, I take that to heart because for years I was a SCADA apologist. I've up until like 2010, I said, oh, it's going to take decades and we can't fix it. It's sort of the same thing with detection. Oh, we should do all these other things first and then we'll get to detection. Interesting. One last thing on this before we get to the community itself. I think this is one of the things that people push back, and I do some too as well, in terms of the value of threat intel and other things related to that to an asset owner is it seems like most of what we're seeing, and maybe we're just not seeing it, is this classic stuff that I don't need a lot of threat intel. People are going to spearfish, then they're going to ride in remote access because it's not two-factor or however they decide to ride in remote access or find some way through their perimeter. And then once they're inside, it's a GUI center, and they're going to do what they choose to do. So if I know that's the case, I could understand how it would be very helpful in incident response, but how is it helpful before someone's hit if they know these are the basics I have to deal with?
So right off the bat, I will say Intel is like the 5% secret sauce on a well-functioning program. It's not go do Intel and build out a giant Intel team when you haven't done these other things too. But my flippant comment is the people that sort of talk at me or put out their little passive aggressive tweets or whatever about Intel and IR are the people not doing Intel and IR. Like it's never the other crowd because they get it because they use it. But to answer your question really specifically, when I look at the security risk in a program at the very beginning, before I go and buy a single tool or make a single org chart, I would want to know what the risk is. And I think that risk should be massively informed by three things. One, the smart people I've got around the room, my engineers, my operators. Hey, what are y'all concerned about? Let me just understand this. Number two is consequence driven. What actually could go wrong regardless of how it accomplishes? What do I need to be aware of? Like, oh, the reversing of the polarity there could cause a safety issue. I need to know that. And then the third is intel driven, which is really ground truth reality. And as much as I love consequence, the flaw of consequence is that it's kind of art of the possible. There's so many different things that can happen and go wrong. So to have Intel drive that of here's the 4 or 5 that we're seeing and where there's a Venn diagram with consequence, let's go focus on those 2 or 3 things. So I like Intel at the beginning of a program to help inform it. And then I don't care about it again until I'm doing detection and thinking about how do I go proactively hunt in my environment and what's the latest of the tactics and techniques of the adversary similar. And to answer your question, is a lot more happening that people aren't seeing. Yes. And I've been saying this for years, and we try to put out the year in review reports and try to show some of it, but we get locked up in a lot of NDAs. We got to be careful on that. But there's a lot more state activity going on than people realize. And it's not just scanning of websites, but it's stuff that's truly scaring people and getting into operations networks. There's a lot more ransomware happening every single week in the operations technology environments than you'll ever hear about in the news. And there's a ton of intellectual property theft, where these companies are storing, and the intellectual property isn't just some recipe that you're storing in an ERP system. A lot of the intellectual property in the manufacturing and the chemical industry and these other industries is about the physical process. How did we engineer it, and how do we set it up and integrate it to a place that can take cheaper quality inputs and make higher quality outputs? And they're getting robbed left and right. So for those companies, think of the top 10% of the asset owners out there that have made those investments. Intel is a wonderful lightning rod of what to focus on and when, and they leverage it really, really effectively. Do I think the cooperative or the water muni that's sharing an IT guy or gal with 4 other, munis, and they mow the lawn on Friday should be reading an Intel report? No, not at all.
It's funny, just to back up your Intel, I did some work with a food and beverage manufacturer who was incredibly sensitive about their process for making their product. And there were no cameras. They had to sign all sorts of papers because they felt like if their competitors knew how they made the product, it would hurt them. So, and that's just, again, I don't want to say who it was, but it was literally someone you would never imagine they would be concerned about such a thing. It was just something that everyone eats. It's on the shelf.
Yep.
And I also will say in defense of the products, in terms of the detection capability, I do have a number of clients and a number of friends that have these products, and they tell me of things they have found. So if they are monitoring them, they are working, they are providing information. So I'm still, despite our disagreement about where, I'm very bullish on the technology. And certainly Dragos is one of the major players in that. Let's maybe end with a little softer subject about the ICS security community and maybe an ICS security professional. So it was funny, in S420, my keynote was, this was the best time to be in ICS security. There's jobs everywhere. Find something you really want to do and do it, because you can work almost anywhere you want. And then we hit COVID and we had a little bit of layoffs and such, not too deep in this sector. And things really started to bounce back with people hiring in the August, September timeframe. Where are we now? What are the prospects if I'm, let's say, an entry-level or a mid-level person in ICS security? What are my prospects across the industry?
I think way better than before. And so let's touch on that COVID theme for a second. For many companies, They were told, we're air-gapped, we're segmented. Speaking up to the board, we don't need to do that. We're good. And then all of a sudden, COVID happened, and people started remoting in from home, and operators and similar. And the board is sitting there going, look, I'm not technical, but you can't be disconnected and working from home. Something's not adding up here. And I saw a true CEO level buy-in of, holy crap, we got to do OT security. Even when I sit over in the World Economic Forum and doing these committees on electricity and oil and gas, OT as a talking point at the World Economic Forum, like internationally, that's insane. The president of the United States talking about an OT specific action plan, and the awareness is huge. So what does that translate into from a personnel perspective? Every single company that we work with, which in of itself is a collection bias, so got to be careful there. Every single company is hiring OT specific cybersecurity people, and they're doing it however they can. Do we bring them up through operations? Cool. Bring them over and teach them cyber. Do we bring cyber folks in and teach them operate? Cool. Whatever it takes, we're doing it. And I see the same from my class, which I've been teaching now since 2014. In the early days, it was kind of some of the believers, and we kind of know it. We just want to sharpen our skills. Now I'm seeing from a high school or university program these are brand new grads, and they're all just sort of using this as the pipeline. So do I agree with your keynote? Yes. Do I think that position has changed? Yes, I think it's gotten better. And I don't anticipate it changing anytime soon. I think if you're joining the field, it's a great time to join. I think there are more opportunities than you can expect. I think the difficulty is truly the entry level. It's so hard for people without any skills to find a job, and the utilities are probably the best at this. There's good people in every industry, but the utilities are great. We get it. Come on in. We'll send you to some SANS classes. We'll have some range time for you, but we're going to train you up. We know you'll leave in 4 years, but come on. And I'd love to see the DHS do more of that. I'd love to see the DHS say, we're going to really train you up knowing you're going to leave, but that's okay because we're going to flood the field with these qualified people.
Yeah, that would be a very worthwhile effort for the government to do that. Yeah, the entry level, I've heard from people that it's sometimes tough to get into this because they're looking for experience, and it's a very hard area to get experience in until you're in the area. I mean, it's catch-22, but I guess it's not unique to our industry. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Maybe as a last question for you, overall, if we look at the community broadly, what does each of us need to do, or what does the community need to do to make progress in actually moving towards this secure critical infrastructure, secure OT world? You know, the S4 tagline, create the future. What is something that personnel needs to do, the people in the community need to do to move that forward?
I think the people in the community need to be hyper aware, not only of what the mission is at their company and what drives the business, but where are they going? Most of the companies we have discussions with, the digital transformation projects or similar, you can call it buzzword all you want, but the industry's changing. And in the face of that change, be aware of the risks that are changing and tailor the answer to that. There's a lot of like almost tribalism at times of, this is my lane, this is what I advocate for, and I've been advocating it for 15 years. And it's like, hey, y'all, a lot of things are changing. Let's look at this. And we really got to get away from like tearing down people. I ignore as much of it as I can, but there's some pretty toxic stuff in our community at any given time, and it's not helping anybody. I've sat in meetings with you or groups with you, Singaporean group as an example, where they were going to tag another member of the community to join, and they looked at their Twitter feed and they're like, nah, never mind. And so we got to be careful with that, because these are adult conversations that are happening. We have to be adults, or we're not going to be trusted to take care of critical infrastructure. And as long as you show up with that humble, hungry, ready to go, hey, I can help you attitude without being toxic, you're going to find a seat at the table.
Well, I really heard two things there. One was the humble, toxic, work and play well with others, because that's just required. It's a little easier for someone like me when I'm writing or talking on here to be a little more forthright and
no, you're an analyst.
Not worry
though.
as much.
Okay.
but I will tell people, don't realize a lot of times when people meet me in a company, they're just amazed at the company has a mission, the company is in a certain place, and you have to take that into account. So when I'm doing consulting, it's not this aspirational, this is where we need to be as a community. It's okay, here we are, here's the real world, this is what we can do. But I think that first point you made is dead on. I see this as the biggest failing maybe in our industry, is that we don't understand what our businesses are there to do.
Yep.
And if we can understand that more, it'd be really great. Well, Rob, it's been fantastic having you on. I could have you on every week, but I try to pick and choose to not overwhelm you. I appreciate everything you're doing for the community, both for your team and growing it and the product, and just wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, man. And always a pleasure to be on. And I'm so looking forward to S4 next year. That is therapy in the wings.
You and me both.